Today we bring you a real-life story, a drama many women face in their marriages. The divorced sister-in-law returns home. The mother-in-law gives an order: either you serve her or you get out. I just smiled and informed my mother-in-law, "Tomorrow I'm leaving for Paris for work for a year, so you'll have to manage." My husband's face went pale. "If you leave, who will take care of this house?" I answered with a sentence that left the entire family in stunned silence. The sharp scent of turpentine and Damar varnish filled the small studio on the third floor. Under the specialized light, Eleanor retouched the cracks of an antique oil painting with a fine brush, its paint layer flaking away. As an expert art and antiques restorer, she required absolute silence. That room was her private world, insulated from the crowded brownstone in the historic and bustling neighborhood of Park Slope, Brooklyn. The stillness was suddenly shattered by a commotion. The rattling of suitcase wheels and inconsolable sobbing echoed up from the ground floor. Eleanor sighed and covered the canvas. She knew the storm had arrived. Going down to the living room, Eleanor found Jessica, her sister-in-law, sitting on the floor amidst 3 suitcases, wailing. Carol, her mother-in-law, was desperately trying to console her daughter, while James, her father-in-law, sat in his wheelchair in a corner, his gaze lost to the after-effects of a stroke. Upon seeing Eleanor, Carol yelled at her for taking so long to come down and ordered her to make some orange juice for Jessica and bring up her luggage. Eleanor went to the kitchen in silence. Since getting married, she had grown accustomed to the authoritarian tone and unreasonable demands, despite the fact that she covered all the household expenses. When she brought the juice, Jessica began her lament. Her husband was a scoundrel, his family a bunch of cheapskates. They had kicked her out of the house just for accidentally breaking a vase. She was demanding a divorce and wanted to move back into her mother's house. Carol hugged her daughter, cursing her in-laws and declaring that she would take care of her little girl. Eleanor, arms crossed, observed the scene. She knew Jessica's character well and suspected there was more to the story, but silence was the wisest option. At that moment, Carol suddenly ordered her to clear out the third-floor studio, to move or throw away all of Eleanor's tools so Jessica could move in. She said her daughter needed a bright, well-ventilated space. Eleanor froze. The third floor was her workshop, filled with chemicals and valuable artworks that required strict temperature and humidity control. The spare room only contained storage and documents. Swapping rooms was not something that could be done lightly. Eleanor calmly explained the dangers and the risk of having to pay enormous compensation if something was damaged. She proposed temporarily setting up the ground floor den or having Jessica share a room with Carol for a few days while they found a solution. The moment she heard the word no, Carol sprang up, pointing a finger at Eleanor. Her voice was a shrill shriek. She called her selfish and petty, unable to help her sister in her time of need. She mocked Eleanor's profession, a dirty job of patching up old junk, which she claimed needed no luxuries or special spaces. She could just pile it all in a corner. She declared that this was her house, and she decided how things were organized. A daughter-in-law had no right to an opinion. Just then, the familiar hum of a Vespa scooter stopped at the door. Michael, her husband, was home from work. Seeing the tension in the room, he asked in confusion what was happening. Jessica, upon seeing her brother, burst into tears again, running to hug him and telling him her tragic story of mistreatment by her in-laws. Michael listened, his face reddening with anger for his sister. He turned to Eleanor, and seeing her standing there with a cold expression, he frowned. Carol seized the opportunity to add fuel to the fire, complaining to her son that his wife was so selfish she wouldn't even give up a room for her own sister-in-law. Michael sighed and, in a reproachful tone, addressed Eleanor. He said his sister was going through a tough time and that they, as the older siblings, should be understanding. It was just a simple room. She shouldn't be so calculating with Jessica. He asked her to make the effort to move her things, or take some of them to the storage facility at the museum, where she worked to let Jessica have the room so she could be comfortable. Eleanor looked at the man she shared her life with and felt a profound disappointment. He didn't care about her work or the difficulties she had explained. He only cared about keeping up appearances and indulging his sister's whims. In the eyes of Michael and his family, her art restoration work was just an insignificant hobby. Eleanor remained silent for a long moment and then uttered a concise sentence. she was not moving her studio. She would clear out the spare room a bit to place a twin bed for Jessica. That was her limit. With that, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving behind Carol's insults and Michael's helpless gaze. The storm had only just begun, and Eleanor knew it wouldn't stop at a dispute over a room. Jessica's presence in the house was like a malignant tumor that metastasized quickly, completely upsetting the family's fragile balance. Jessica didn't seem at all like a woman who had just left a painful, broken marriage. On the contrary, she treated her return home as an extended vacation where she was to be waited on hand and foot. The next morning, before the sun rose over the Brooklyn rooftops and long before Eleanor's alarm clock was set to go off, thunderous knocks echoed on her bedroom door. Carol's shrill voice called out to her. She ordered her to get up immediately to go buy artisanal donuts from the famous bakery downtown for Jessica. She said her poor daughter hadn't been able to sleep all night and was craving real donuts in the morning, not the ones from the corner coffee shop. Eleanor rubbed her eyes and looked at the clock. It was barely 5:30 a.m. Tired, she replied that she had an important early meeting at the Institute that day and couldn't wait in line for donuts. She suggested they buy from the corner shop or order a delivery service. The door trembled under Carol's pounding. She accused her of being a lazy sister-in-law who would deny her sister even a simple donut. She brought up how much she had sacrificed to raise Michael, pressuring Eleanor to get up. Michael, beside her, pulled the blanket over his head and mumbled for her to just go for the sake of peace, that a little effort wouldn't kill anyone. Eleanor looked at her husband, swallowing her anger, and got up heavily to get dressed. She drove her car through the biting chill of the New York dawn and waited in a long line for 40 minutes to buy 2 boxes of donuts. When she got home, Jessica was still sleeping soundly in the fresh spare room. Carol took the donut box without a word of thanks, only inspecting if Eleanor had gotten the specific cream-filled ones. Eleanor quickly changed for work with an empty stomach, having no time to eat. The following days were an escalation of absurd demands. Jessica would wake up at noon and demand to eat well and dress fashionably. She complained that Eleanor's cooking was bland and requested fresh lobster and imported charcuterie to regain her strength after her emotional trauma. Carol, indulging her daughter, would hand Eleanor a grocery list with expensive items as soon as she got home from work, assuming Eleanor should pay for everything out of her own pocket. Michael saw his wife's exhaustion, but instead of helping or reprimanding his sister, he chose to ignore it. He told Eleanor that Jessica had been unlucky in love and they needed to compensate her for it. He reminded her not to be stingy, that money could be earned back, but family affection was the most valuable thing. Eleanor smiled bitterly. Money could be earned back, yes, but she was the one earning it. Michael, with his barely sufficient architect's salary and his habit of treating his friends to keep up appearances, didn't contribute enough. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Eleanor had accepted a major external restoration project, an antique oil painting from a very demanding private collector. She had brought the painting home to get a head start on the work over the weekend. The canvas was carefully placed on an easel in her third-floor studio next to expensive solvents imported from France. Eleanor went down to the kitchen to prepare dinner as ordered by Carol. When she returned to her studio, a strong chemical odor hit her. The door, which she always carefully locked, was wide open. She ran in and froze. Jessica was sitting nonchalantly in Eleanor's work chair, holding a bottle of a potent solvent used to clean old varnishes, and was using it with a cotton ball to remove her nail polish. Worse, she had spilled some of the liquid, splashing a corner of the valuable oil painting. The paint, upon contact with the solvent, had bubbled and smeared, creating a disfigured blotch of color. Eleanor screamed, running to snatch the bottle from her. Trembling, she examined the damage to the painting, a cold sweat running down her back. While the damage wasn't irreparable, fixing it would require immense effort and high risk, not to mention the serious damage to her reputation with the client. Jessica, surprised, jumped up defiantly. She told Eleanor not to overreact, that she had just borrowed a little nail polish remover. The one in the bathroom was out, and seeing so many bottles up there, she thought they were unimportant things and took one. Eleanor turned, her eyes bloodshot with rage. She yelled that it was a professional chemical, that one small bottle cost hundreds of dollars, not some cheap remover from the supermarket. And most importantly, she had damaged a client's painting, for which compensation could amount to thousands of dollars and could even cost Eleanor her career if the client sued. The argument alerted Carol, who rushed upstairs. Seeing her daughter being scolded by her daughter-in-law, she defended her without asking what had happened. She accused Eleanor of being stingy, of making a scene over a small accident. She said those old, broken paintings had no value. Michael had also just arrived. He saw his furious wife, his pouting sister, and his shouting mother. He glanced at the damaged painting and then at Eleanor and said lightly, "Well, just try to fix it." Why scold her? She didn't know. You're the older sister. You should keep your important things stored away better. Eleanor looked at the three people in front of her and felt as if a giant rock was crushing her chest. The disrespect, the blatant invasion of her space and work wasn't simple ignorance, it was the essence of this family. They considered her efforts and her belongings as something they had the right to use and trample on. After the painting incident, Eleanor spent 3 sleepless nights repairing the damage. She had to use a magnifying glass, tweezers, and tiny needles to remove each damaged paint particle and then mix colors to retouch it millimeter by millimeter. The smell of chemicals and the stress gave her an unbearable headache, but what hurt most was the indifference of her husband's family. Not a single apology from Jessica, not one word of concern from Michael. One weeknight, Eleanor had to stay late at the Institute for a meeting and to finish up backlogged paperwork. She sent Michael a text letting him know she would be late, asking him to start the rice and pick up some takeout. Michael saw the message but didn't reply. Around 9 p.m., Eleanor arrived home exhausted. The house was quiet, the living room light on but empty. She went into the kitchen, hoping to find something to eat. The table was set, but the food was cold and picked over. In the dish of stewed beef, only a few pieces of fat and some burnt vegetables remained. The soup bowl was nearly empty. The rice cooker was open with only a few dry grains stuck to the bottom. Eleanor swallowed hard, her stomach growling. She opened the fridge, looking for some eggs to boil, but it was empty. The milk she had bought for breakfast was also gone. At that moment, she heard laughter and lively chatter coming from Carol's room on the ground floor. The door was ajar, and Eleanor saw the whole family gathered, watching television and eating fruit for dessert. Jessica was lying with her head in her mother's lap, eating a slice of mango. Michael was giving his father a foot massage. A scene of a happy, united family, but without her. Seeing Eleanor's shadow pass by, Carol shouted in a sharp voice. She asked where she had been so late. "A married woman shouldn't be out all day neglecting her duties. The food is there. You should eat quickly and clean everything up. Don't leave it to attract ants," Jessica added in a syrupy voice that her sister-in-law's job, surrounded by old things full of bad energy, made her a gloomy and bitter person. She was probably late because she stayed out somewhere to air out the bad smell before daring to come home. She let out a little laugh, mocking that her sister-in-law made money from such an unglamorous profession and put on airs like a busy executive. Eleanor didn't respond. She was too tired to argue. She went up to her room in silence, thinking only of showering and sleeping to forget her hunger. As she opened her closet for clothes, she paused. The hidden drawer where she kept some emergency cash was out of place. A bad feeling washed over her. She opened the small wooden box she kept hidden under her winter clothes. It was empty. The $2,500 she had withdrawn the day before to pay for a specialization course and her parents' medication was gone. In that house, besides herself, only Michael knew where she kept that money. Eleanor ran down to Carol's room with the empty box in her hand. She stood in front of Michael, showed him the box, and with a trembling voice asked him where the money was. Michael flinched, avoiding her gaze. Carol and Jessica stopped laughing and stared at her. Michael, nervous, scratched his head. He said he had just borrowed it and hadn't had time to tell her. Since Jessica was so sad, he had given her the money to buy a full spa treatment and some new dresses to cheer her up. He thought that as husband and wife, the money belonged to both of them. He didn't understand why she was getting so worked up. Eleanor felt as if she had been struck by lightning. $2,500 was the fruit of an entire month of hard work, inhaling dust and chemicals, money she had saved penny by penny. Her husband had calmly stolen it so his sister could go to a spa and go shopping. Meanwhile, he hadn't given her a single dollar for household expenses that month. In a restrained voice, Eleanor asked Michael if he knew what she was going to use that money for. Michael, annoyed, replied that she wasn't short of money, that when she got a new project, he would pay her back. He didn't understand why she was making such a scene in front of his parents. Jessica chimed in with disdain. She said her sister-in-law was a cheapskate. "My sister-in-law is suffering a misfortune, and my brother gives me a little money to cheer me up, and she's complaining." She mocked Eleanor, saying she earned money but was so tight-fisted no one could stand her. Carol joined the chorus, accusing Eleanor of being a petty woman who counted every last cent. "My son's money is also mine. Michael took money from his own home. He didn't steal it from anyone, so I don't understand the fuss." She concluded with a hurtful phrase. "Don't think you're so important just because you earn a few bucks and look down on this family. Michael is an architect. He does great things. When he makes millions, you'll benefit too. Now that he's going through a rough patch, you have to be understanding and support him." Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, tears welling in her eyes, but she swallowed them. She realized she was not only the family's ATM, but also an unpaid servant, despised and exploited to the bone. On Sunday, Eleanor planned to sleep in a little to recover from an exhausting week, but at 7 a.m., Carol was already pounding on the door to wake her up. She handed her a sheet of paper filled with text. The day's task list. She said it was a beautiful day and she had invited some of Jessica's friends and a few ladies from her neighborhood women's association to cheer her up. Eleanor's task was to go to the market and prepare a feast for about 15 people. The menu was already decided: slow smoked brisket, a seafood boil, clam chowder, elaborate dishes that required a lot of time and money. She also pointed to a mountain of Jessica's expensive silk clothes in the bathroom. She said the washing machine was broken, so Eleanor had to wash everything by hand, hang it carefully, and iron it so Jessica would have something to wear to greet her guests. Eleanor held the list, her hands trembling with rage. She looked at Carol and said, articulating each word, that she was tired and needed to rest. She had worked nonstop all week, and when she got home, she had to do household chores. She didn't have the strength to serve at Jessica's party. She suggested Carol cater the food, or that Jessica take care of her own friends. As for the clothes, whoever wore them could wash them. She was not a maid. Carol's face turned purple upon hearing Eleanor's firm refusal. She never expected her usually submissive daughter-in-law to dare talk back to her like that. She slammed her hand on the glass table with a crash that startled James. She screamed that Eleanor was insolent and rude. She accused her of being an ungrateful daughter-in-law who thought earning money gave her the right to trample on her mother-in-law. She said it was a disgrace for the family to have a daughter-in-law like her. Your sister-in-law is suffering, and her friends are coming to support her. A good sister-in-law should roll up her sleeves and help to make the family look good, not be lazy and resentful. Michael, who was having coffee on the patio, ran in. Seeing his mother on the verge of an attack, he turned to Eleanor and yelled at her. He asked what she had done to make his mother so angry. "It's just one meal. You should just make it and get it over with. Jessica's friends are important people. You can't embarrass the family." Eleanor looked Michael straight in the eye and asked who was embarrassing whom. She asked if the $2,500 he had stolen from her wasn't enough for Jessica to hire a caterer. Why did they have to exploit her? Jessica came down from her room, and hearing the conversation, she started crying loudly. She wailed that her sister-in-law hated her and wanted to kick her out, which was why she was picking fights. She threatened to leave so she wouldn't be a bother, saying she'd rather die on the street. Carol, distraught over her daughter, reached the peak of her anger. She pointed at Eleanor and gave her an ultimatum. Her voice was cold, hard, and cruel. "I'll tell you this once. As long as I live in this house, I'm in charge. Jessica is my daughter, and it's natural for her to live here. You are the daughter-in-law. Your duty is to care for and serve this family. If you can't serve your sister-in-law right now, if you don't fulfill your duty as a daughter-in-law, then get out. This house doesn't welcome lazy, insolent, and selfish daughters-in-law like you. Leave and get out of my sight so Michael can marry another woman, one who is more sensible." The room fell into a deathly silence after Carol's outburst. Eleanor looked at Michael, waiting for a word of support or at least an attempt to calm the situation, but there was nothing. Michael stood there with his head down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, not daring to look at his wife. He was afraid of his mother, of his sister's tears, and above all, the false dignity of a weak man made him choose silence, thereby approving his mother's irrationality. Michael's silence was the final knife that severed the last thread of patience and affection left in Eleanor's heart. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. A strange calm enveloped her. She looked at Carol, at Jessica, and finally at Michael. In her mind, a bold decision had formed, clearer and firmer than ever. Eleanor gave a slight smile, a chilling smile that made Carol shudder. She said nothing, turned silently, and went up to her room. Carol, believing she had been scared into submission, said haughtily to Michael, "You have to be strict to make them obey. You can't spoil women. They get out of hand." But Carol didn't know that Eleanor wasn't going upstairs to change and come down to the kitchen, but to open her laptop and send an email confirming the most important flight of her life for the next morning. The next morning, the atmosphere in the 3-story brownstone in Park Slope was as heavy as lead. The New York sky was gray, and a fine drizzle added to the feeling of gloom and dampness typical of old, dark houses. Normally at this hour, the kitchen would already be bustling with the smell of fresh coffee and toast filling the house. But today, the kitchen was cold and silent. Carol woke up early, listening from her bed. She expected to hear the familiar sounds of Eleanor preparing breakfast, the sound of running water, but there was nothing. She smiled to herself, thinking her daughter-in-law, frightened by her scolding the night before, was either crying in regret or had slipped out quietly to the market to make amends. She woke James with a loud voice to go to the bathroom, telling him to get ready, that they were having a big meal today, and their daughter-in-law would prepare delicious dishes. But when Carol helped James out into the living room, the scene she found left her stunned. On the dining table, instead of plates and cutlery, there was only a printed sheet of paper and a thick folder. Eleanor was sitting there with a steaming cup of black coffee in her hand, dressed impeccably in a gray pantsuit, her hair in a sleek bun and light makeup that gave her a surprisingly sophisticated air. Beside her were 2 enormous suitcases. Michael came downstairs, yawning. Seeing his wife elegantly dressed and drinking coffee instead of dealing with the meal, he frowned. He asked what she was doing. "Instead of going to the market and preparing food for Jessica's guests, you're sitting there like a queen. My mother said we need to prepare food for 15 people today." Eleanor placed the coffee cup on its saucer. The sound of porcelain echoed in the silence. She looked up, gazing directly at Carol and then at Michael. With a voice so calm it was chilling, she said that since everyone was awake, she had a brief announcement to make. Carol, arrogant, asked what new drama she was stirring up. "If you want to apologize, do it quickly and get to the kitchen, and stop the theatrics." Eleanor smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and slid the piece of paper toward her mother-in-law. It was the official letter from the institute where she worked, confirming her year-long transfer to Paris for a specialization and work program. In a slow voice, she said that in fulfilling her mother-in-law's wish from the previous night, she had realized she lacked the capacity and generosity to serve her sister-in-law like a maid or to satisfy her mother-in-law. Therefore, she had decided to leave so the family could live in peace, so mother and daughter could take care of each other without her bothering them. Michael grabbed the paper and read it. His hands began to tremble. He stammered, asking what this was about going to Paris. "A year? Why didn't you consult me?" Eleanor stood up and adjusted her jacket. She replied to Michael that she had received the opportunity last month, but had hesitated out of concern for his father and the family. However, the previous night, his mother and he had helped her make the final decision. She had already bought the plane ticket. The flight left at 1:01 a.m. The car service to take her to the airport was about to arrive. Carol, hearing this, let out a sarcastic, bitter laugh. She told her to go, to disappear. Who did she think she was threatening? "Once you leave, don't you dare set foot in this house again. Let's see if the house will collapse without you. I dare you to leave at once. I'll marry Michael off to a new wife, 10 times more beautiful and obedient than this daughter-in-law who thinks she's superior." Jessica also came down at that moment. Hearing her sister-in-law was leaving, her face lit up with joy. With a pout, she said if she was leaving, she should do it quickly, and leave her the big room, the fridge keys, and money for the market before she went. Eleanor looked at the three people in front of her and shook her head wearily. She bent down, took her suitcases, and said lightly to Carol, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm going to work to develop my career, not on vacation. When I'm gone, you'll have to take care of the house. Jessica is a grown woman. You can raise her in my place. And as for the new wife for Michael, take your time, at least until he signs the divorce papers." The doorbell rang. It was the car service. Eleanor, without a single glance back, dragged her suitcases and walked out the door, leaving behind the bewilderment that was beginning to dawn on Michael. Michael was the first to react. He ran out, blocking the door and grabbing Eleanor's arm, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. Michael wasn't worried about losing his wife, but about something much more practical: money. He yelled at Eleanor, asking that if she just left like this, what about the mortgage on the house? My father's illness and his monthly medications, the utility bills, the food, and on top of that, the debt to the bank. He screamed, asking that if she left, who would take care of everything? Do you think you can just wash your hands of it all? Carol, upon hearing the word money, also jolted. She ran to grab Eleanor's suitcase, her tone changing completely. She said she could go wherever she wanted, but she had to leave money so her husband and family could manage. "You're taking all the money. Do you expect my father to starve to death?" Eleanor freed herself from Michael, looked her husband straight in the face, and threw the question back at him. She asked how he, a man, the head of the family, could ask his wife that question. "Where is your architect's salary and the profits from the projects you boast so much about to your friends? Or have you spent it all on your fake image and partying with them?" Michael was speechless, his face flushed. Eleanor turned to Carol. She said clearly, so the whole family could hear, that 2 years ago Michael had lost a lot of money in a failed business venture and had taken a loan from lenders who threatened to break his legs. It was she who had to use her paycheck as collateral, take out a bank loan, and even sell the jewelry her mother had given her to pay off Michael's debts and renovate the house so his father would have a decent place to recover. The deed to that house was currently at the bank as collateral for a mortgage. Every month, the payment of principal and interest amounted to over $2,500. For 2 years, all that money had been deducted from her bank account. Eleanor looked at her watch and smiled bitterly. She delivered the news that landed like a thunderclap. She said that on the 15th of this month, the next payment was due. That is, in just 5 days. "I'm leaving, and of course, my bank account is going with me. The remaining debt is about $350,000. Michael and the family will have to figure out how to pay it. If you're late, the bank will foreclose and repossess the house. Then you shouldn't blame me." Carol, hearing the figure of $350,000 and the risk of losing the house, felt her legs give way and she collapsed onto the sofa. Jessica's jaw dropped. The pastry she was eating fell to the floor. She stammered, asking how it was possible. Michael always said they were rich and his business was booming. Michael stood frozen, pale as a ghost. He knew Eleanor was telling the truth. For 2 years, he had lived off his wife, accustomed to a lifestyle he couldn't afford, forgetting the enormous debt hanging over their heads. He always thought Eleanor would take care of it forever. Eleanor delivered the final blow. She said that last night his mother had told her if she wouldn't serve, she should get out. "I've gotten out. Now it's your turn to prove your worth. My work trip is an opportunity to earn money and pay off the debts I took on to help you. Whether you keep this house or not will depend on your family's luck." With that, Eleanor walked resolutely toward the car. The door slammed shut, and the car pulled away, leaving behind the house plunged into absolute panic. Michael ran a few steps after the car, but it was useless. He turned to look at his mother and sister and saw a dark future looming over him. Eleanor left, leaving a huge void and a chaos that no one in her family had anticipated. That very morning, hell opened its doors for Carol and her children. Jessica's guests called for the address to come to the party. Carol, desperate, told Jessica to cancel, making up a story that her father had taken a turn for the worse and was in the emergency room. Jessica threw a tantrum, furious about looking bad in front of her friends, but seeing the cold kitchen and empty fridge, she had no choice. That afternoon, the entire family had to eat instant noodles. Michael, out of habit, sat at the table waiting to be served, and only after a while remembered his wife was gone. He clumsily went to the kitchen to heat water and spilled half the kettle on the floor, nearly burning himself. At medication time, James moaned in his bed. Carol searched through all the cabinets for her husband's blood pressure and memory pills, but couldn't find them. Eleanor always left them organized by day and time in a pill organizer. Now, faced with a pile of colorful blister packs in a bag, Carol didn't know which was which. Fearing she'd give him the wrong pill, she decided James would skip his afternoon dose. In the evening, the suffocating heat of the Brooklyn summer seeped into every corner of the house. The dirty laundry of Jessica and the rest of the family piled up in the bathroom, emitting a sour smell. Carol asked Jessica to do the laundry, but she protested, saying her gel nails, which cost a fortune, would be ruined by the detergent. Carol then asked Michael. He, overwhelmed with how to get the money for the bank, grumbled for her to leave it. He would take it to the laundromat later. For dinner, no one could stand more noodles. They demanded rice. Michael rolled up his sleeves and went to the kitchen to make rice and an omelet. But the poor man, who had never done anything in the house, forgot to turn on the rice cooker. When he served the meal, he discovered swollen rice in cold water. The omelet was as salty as brine because he had been heavy-handed with the soy sauce. James, hungry, tried a piece but coughed and spat it all out. Carol looked at the disastrous meal, her sick and neglected husband, her useless daughter glued to her phone, and her clumsy son, her eyes filled with tears. She began to curse aloud. She cursed Eleanor for being a wretch and abandoning them. She cursed Michael for being a useless man who couldn't control his wife. The house that Eleanor had kept immaculate had, in less than 12 hours, turned into a messy, dirty battlefield filled with shouting. Darkness fell over the house, not just the darkness of night, but of helplessness. A week passed, and Carol's family's life sank into crisis. But the real blow wasn't the bad food or the dirty house, it was the bills. On Monday afternoon, the building super rang the bell with a stack of notices: electricity, water, internet, and co-op fees. Eleanor had always paid them through automatic bank drafts, but before leaving, she had canceled all automatic payments. Michael held the electric bill. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. $400 for 1 month. He couldn't believe it. He yelled at Carol, asking why it was so high. The cause was Jessica. Since she arrived, she had kept the air conditioning at 65 degrees day and night, even when she went out, so the room would be cool when she returned. She also left the hot water heater on 24/7. Michael ran up to Jessica's room and scolded her. She, who was applying a face mask, answered him cheekily. She said he shouldn't get so worked up over a few dollars. What was the point of earning money otherwise? Michael, furious, threw the bill in her face, screaming where he was supposed to get the money to pay it. He hadn't received his paycheck yet, and the client for his last project was late with the payment. Still in shock from the electric bill, Michael received a text from the cable company informing him of an internet shutdown for 2 months of non-payment. James couldn't watch television because the signal had been cut too. The money for daily groceries was also a burden. Carol, used to shopping without looking at prices because Eleanor always gave her extra money, now saw how the money Michael gave her vanished after buying just a chicken and some vegetables. She had to start haggling, and the vendors at the market mocked her, a lady from a good neighborhood being so cheap. The climax came that night at dinner. Michael announced he only had $200 left to get through the rest of the week, and he still hadn't bought his father's medications, which cost $150. The mood turned somber. Carol, while cleaning some poor-quality vegetables, blamed Eleanor. She said she was ungrateful, that she had left without paying the bills, that she wanted to ruin them. She urged Michael to call Eleanor and ask for money, telling him his father was very ill. Michael called, but only heard the automated operator's voice. He tried WhatsApp and saw Eleanor was online, but she had blocked him. Desperate, he turned to Jessica, who was filing her nails. He asked if she had any money he could borrow to pay the electric bill before it was cut off. Jessica, startled, hid her purse and said she had nothing, that she had left her husband's house with only the clothes on her back. But her shifty eyes didn't fool Michael. He remembered the luxury brand shopping bags Jessica had been receiving by courier. A suspicion about his dear sister began to grow in his mind. At that moment, the landline rang. A man's voice with a threatening tone asked for Miss Jessica to settle some accounts. The torrential New York rain had just stopped, leaving a humid atmosphere from the steam rising off the asphalt. Inside the house, the air was even more suffocating. Michael sat absently in front of the cold dinner, the electric bill in his hand, not knowing how to pay it. When the doorbell rang insistently and menacingly, Carol, who was massaging James, was startled. She told Michael to go see who was being so rude. Michael got up reluctantly and opened the door. In front of him were two unknown men. One was burly, with a thick gold chain around his neck and a face full of scars. The other, thinner, wore a white shirt and carried a leather briefcase. The thin man asked brusquely if this was Miss Jessica's house. Michael nodded hesitantly. Before he could ask who they were, the two men entered the house as if they owned it. Carol, seeing them, got up frightened and stood protectively in front of James. She yelled, asking who they were and what they wanted, threatening to call the police. The burly man laughed, sat down in a chair, and lit a cigarette. He said to call whoever she wanted. They were just there to collect a debt, not to rob anyone. The thin man opened his briefcase. He took out some papers and threw them on the table. Michael picked them up. His eyes widened as he saw the total debt with interest, $50,000. Below was Jessica's signature and thumbprint. The document was titled Business Investment Loan. Carol took the paper, trembling. She couldn't believe it. She stammered that it must be a mistake, that her daughter was a good girl, she had just been kicked out by her husband and couldn't have borrowed so much money. Just then, Jessica came down from her room, live-streaming her hardships on social media. Seeing the two men, her face drained of color. She tried to turn around and flee, but the burly man blocked her on the stairs. The thin man tapped his fingers on the table. He said Miss Jessica thought that by running away from her husband, she could escape her debts. Your ex-husband was very patient, paying off your debts twice, but the third time he got tired and kicked you out so your parents could teach you a lesson. The deadline to pay is tomorrow. If there's no money, you shouldn't complain if things get serious. Michael looked at his sister, his expression shifting from disbelief to fury. He screamed at Jessica, asking what all this meant. Jessica, trembling, fell to her knees at Carol's feet, crying. She confessed she had gotten involved in an online pyramid scheme and been scammed. To try to recover the money, she took loans from loan sharks to gamble online, but lost even more. The debt spiraled out of control. Hearing this, Carol fainted on the sofa. James babbled, drool trickling from the corner of his mouth from the shock. Michael was paralyzed. The story of the broken vase was a lie to hide her shameful truth. The entire family had been deceived, and the one person who might have seen it coming, Eleanor, had been driven out by them. The collectors left, but not before warning that if there was no money the next day, this house would be the brightest on the street. The door slammed shut with a thud, like a nail in a coffin. That night, the house was plunged into a terrifying silence. Carol lay in bed with a damp cloth on her forehead. Jessica locked herself in her room. Michael sat on the balcony, chain-smoking. In his desperation, he called Eleanor again, this time through an international calling app. He hoped she was already in Paris and would take pity on them. After a long wait, the screen lit up. Eleanor answered. Behind her, a window showed the rooftops of Paris. She was holding a glass of wine. She looked radiant and elegant, a far cry from her previous disheveled image. Michael, his throat dry, asked if she had arrived safely, if she was comfortable. Eleanor took a sip of wine and, in a frosty voice, asked why he was calling. If it's for money, you should hang up to save your credit, Michael pleaded with her. He told her about the collectors, Jessica's $50,000 debt, his mother fainting. He begged her to save him, to lend him from her savings to pay them off before they killed Jessica. Eleanor's expression didn't change. She put down the glass and stared into the camera. She said to listen carefully. My savings are the sweat of 10 years of work. I have no obligation to throw them into the bottomless pit your sister has dug. When she was spending money on luxury bags and spas, did she think of her sister-in-law, or did she call me a maid? When your mother kicked me out, Where were you? What did you do?" Michael, whimpering, said he was wrong. He had been a coward, but they were husband and wife. If she didn't feel sorry for him, she should feel sorry for his father, who was very sick. Eleanor laughed bitterly. She said if he cared about his father, he should sell his Vespa scooter and his collection of watches to pay the debt. "As for me, I've already blocked your access to our joint account. You shouldn't expect a single cent from me. It's your family, and you, as the man, have to take care of it." With that, she ended the call, leaving Michael plunged into darkness. He realized his last lifeline had snapped. Eleanor was no longer the submissive, easily manipulated woman. She had transformed. Michael rested his head on the railing, remembering how, when Eleanor was around, everything worked without him lifting a finger. Now, facing adversity, he felt naked and weak. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to a nauseating smell. Michael opened the door and nearly vomited. The door, the stoop, and part of the facade were covered in a mixture of red paint and rotting garbage. Neighbors out for a walk covered their noses and whispered. Michael, furious, cleaned up the mess, feeling the smell and humiliation seep into his skin and his family's pride. Afterward, he went up to Jessica's room, pulled her out of bed, and dragged her in front of her closet full of designer clothes and bags. He yelled at her to sell it all to pay the debt. Jessica clung to her things, screaming that it was her image. How would she face her friends? She told him he was useless, that he should sell his own scooter. The accumulated rage exploded. Michael slapped Jessica with such force that she fell to the floor. She, with a bleeding lip, lunged at him, scratching and screaming. Carol rushed upstairs, and seeing her injured daughter, she pushed Michael, hitting him. Crying, she called him a monster, a coward. She told him Jessica was his sister. If she made a mistake, he should advise her, not hit her, that he was a heartless being, just like his wife. Michael let himself be hit, looking with disgust at his mother defending her spoiled daughter and his selfish sister. He laughed bitterly and said to keep spoiling her, that one day she would sell the whole house and then she would cry. Carol hugged Jessica, and they both cried as if Michael were to blame for everything. Outside, the stench continued to seep through the windows, mingling with the smell of decay from a family in utter decomposition. Lunch that day went untouched. Jessica's sobs and Carol's curses did not cease. James, in his room, heard everything, helpless. Anguish squeezed his chest. In the afternoon, Michael heard his father's ragged breathing. He turned and saw James with a purple face, clutching his chest, his eyes rolling back. Michael screamed in horror. Carol ran in, and seeing her husband convulsing, she shrieked in panic. They called an ambulance, which arrived with sirens blaring and took James to Mount Sinai Hospital. The doctors diagnosed an acute heart attack. His condition was critical, and he needed urgent surgery to save his life. A nurse handed Michael a form to pay a $5,000 deposit for the operation and supplies. Michael looked at the paper with trembling hands. He only had $200 in his wallet. He looked at Carol, who was also pale. She pulled a few bills from her pocket. Michael went into the hallway and frantically called all his friends, the ones he had treated so many times. But he only got excuses. Some were renovating, others had just had a baby, others didn't answer. They all knew his situation, and no one wanted to get involved. The nurse urged him to pay. Every minute was vital. Michael, desperate, told his mother he hadn't gotten anything. Carol, with tears in her eyes, took off the gold necklace she had inherited from her mother. Then, from a hidden pocket, she took out a small cloth bag and extracted 3 gold rings. It was all she had left, the money she was saving for her own and her husband's funerals. She gave the gold to Michael and told him to sell it at the jewelry store across from the hospital to pay what he could, and they would borrow the rest. Michael ran with the gold, still warm from his mother's hands. As he ran, he cried. He was a grown man, an architect, and at the most critical moment for his father, it had to be his mother selling her last possessions to save him. While they waited outside the operating room, Carol cried and complained. She didn't blame Jessica for her debts or Michael for his uselessness. She blamed Eleanor. She said that by leaving, she had taken the house's luck with her, that she had cursed them, and that's why James was like this. If she were here, she would have paid, and we wouldn't have had to sell the gold." Michael, beside her, listened in silence. He had no strength to argue and no face to defend Eleanor. He only felt a vast emptiness and fear. The gold was enough to pay the first deposit, but after the surgery came a costly recovery, and the mortgage was still pending, and Jessica's debt was about to explode. His family's future seemed completely sealed off. At Mount Sinai Hospital, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and summer heat. Michael sat in a hallway, chewing on a stale sandwich. His phone vibrated with calls from the loan sharks and the bank, but he didn't dare answer. Carol, beside him, gaunt after several sleepless nights, fanned herself and lamented her bad luck. She asked Michael if he had managed to get any money, because in the afternoon they had to pay more for medications and the ICU stay. Michael shook his head, saying no one would lend him anything, that even his best friend had blocked him. Jessica appeared with a smoothie in her hand, sat down, and said arrogantly that complaining was useless, that the only solution was to sell the house. Carol was scandalized. She said it was their ancestral home, the place where they honored their ancestors. If they sold it, where would they go? Jessica sipped her smoothie and retorted, "What's more important, saving Dad's life or a house for the dead?" She argued that the house, though old, was in a good neighborhood and they could get close to $1 million for it. With that, they could pay off her debts, Michael's mortgage, and their father's treatment. With the rest, they could buy 3 apartments in the suburbs. They would live like kings. Michael, hearing her, hesitated. He knew selling the family home was a disgrace, but they were desperate. If he sold it, he would be free of debt and could start over without depending on Eleanor. Carol, after some hesitation, looked towards the ICU door where her husband lay. She thought of the collectors, the misery of the last few days, and finally gave in. She said with tears in her eyes that they would sell it to save her husband, and so her children could rebuild their lives. But she demanded they buy another house immediately to move their ancestral altar. Jessica's eyes lit up. She immediately called a real estate agent she knew. She told him to bring a good client, that the sale would be quick. Michael, seeing his sister's enthusiasm in the face of family misfortune, felt a lump in his throat. Since when had his family fallen so low as to sell their ancestral home for money? But he had no other choice. He nodded, becoming an accomplice. The news of the house sale spread quickly. Given its prime location, despite its poor condition, it attracted several buyers. 2 days later, an agent named David brought a wealthy couple. Carol received them, trying to pretend they were selling to move abroad, not because of debt. The buyers loved the house, especially its original woodwork. After a brief negotiation, they agreed on a price of $950,000, a fortune that would solve all their problems. The next day, they met at the title company to sign the purchase agreement and verify the documents. Michael brought the property deed. At the office, the buyer, a meticulous man, asked the closing agent to check the property's legal status with the county recorder's office before paying. After a few minutes, the agent, a serious-looking woman, informed them that the property had a mortgage with Bank of America, securing a loan in Michael's name. Michael nodded, explaining he would use the deposit money to pay off the mortgage and clear the title. But the agent shook her head. The problem was something else. The loan had Michael's wife, Eleanor, as a guarantor and co-owner. The contract stipulated that any transaction related to the property, including paying off the mortgage, required the signatures of both spouses. The bank had assessed their payment capacity based primarily on Eleanor's income, not Michael's. The buyer asked where Mrs. Eleanor was, that she should come and sign. Carol, Jessica, and Michael turned pale. Michael stammered that his wife was working abroad. The agent stated that in that case, they needed a power of attorney validated by the U.S. consulate abroad. Without that document or Eleanor's physical presence, the house could not be sold. It was legally frozen. The buyer, annoyed at the waste of time, got up, took back his check, and left without a word. The real estate agent gave them a contemptuous look and followed his client out. The 3 of them were left alone in the office, their hopes shattered. The shadow of Eleanor, though absent, controlled everything. After returning from the title company, despair took over the house. The hope of selling had vanished. Michael, desperate, tried to contact Eleanor by all means. He sent her dozens of emails, begging, appealing to her compassion, even lying about his father's imminent death, but he got no reply. At night, drunk, he video-called her using a new number. Eleanor answered. She still seemed calm and distant. Michael broke down crying, pleading, and then accusing her of being cruel. He yelled that if she didn't send the power of attorney, they would all die, and would that make her happy? Eleanor waited for him to finish and then replied coldly. She reminded him that the house was mortgaged because of his stock market losses and that she had been paying the debt for 2 years. And now you want to sell it to pay off your sister's debts, erasing all my effort. I am not signing anything. Half of that house is mine. Michael, revealing his true nature, threatened her with divorce. He said a judge would order the sale and division of assets. Eleanor smiled with disdain. She told him she had been waiting for that for a long time, that he should check his email. I've just sent you a gift. Michael opened his email and found a draft of a divorce and asset division agreement. Eleanor had prepared everything, detailing every cent she had contributed with bank statements as proof. She offered him 2 options. He could pay her back all the money she had paid, plus interest, and she would sign. Or they would divorce, and after settling all debts, whatever was left of the house would be divided, leaving him with almost nothing. Michael dropped the phone. He realized Eleanor had planned everything. She hadn't left in a temporary fit of anger. She had left to corner him and force him to face the harsh reality of his own incompetence and character. 3 days later, the house was more desolate than ever. James was still in the hospital, thanks to a new high-interest loan Michael had secured from shady lenders. Carol cared for him day and night. At home, Michael drank, and Jessica, terrified by the collector's threats, looked for something valuable to sell. Her eyes fell on the family heirlooms, where a set of antique bronze candlesticks sat, a family inheritance that, according to Carol, was worth a fortune. Taking advantage of Michael sleeping off his drunkenness, Jessica took the candlesticks, wrapped them in a blanket, and on her way out, also grabbed the television and the microwave. Just as she was walking out the door, Carol arrived unexpectedly. Seeing her daughter stealing the sacred objects, she was horrified. She tried to stop her, screaming if she had lost her mind, if she was going to sell their ancestors' heirlooms. Jessica, cornered, confronted her mother. She yelled that the dead were dead, that she was about to be killed, and all her mother cared about were some pieces of metal. They struggled, and Jessica pushed Carol with all her might. Carol fell, hitting her head on the edge of a table. With a cry of pain, she lay on the floor, bleeding. Jessica, seeing her mother hurt, felt a moment of panic, but the fear of her creditors was stronger. She mumbled an apology and fled with the loot. Carol, on the floor, crying from physical and emotional pain, thought of Eleanor. She remembered how Eleanor was the one who cleaned and cared for those candlesticks with devotion. She had kicked out the good daughter-in-law to welcome the heartless daughter. Remorse consumed her. The waves broke gently on the white sand beach, and the wind whispered through the palm trees. In a luxury villa on the Florida coast, Eleanor sipped chamomile tea. Far from the noise and humidity of Brooklyn, she felt immense freedom and peace. She had never actually gone to Paris. The ticket was real, but she had canceled it. She had accepted the French Museum's project, but would work remotely for the first 3 months. She had lied about her whereabouts to cut off all contact with Michael's family and observe the outcome of their drama from a distance. David, her lawyer and old friend, arrived with a folder. He informed her that all the documents were ready. They had irrefutable proof that Eleanor had been the primary financial contributor to the mortgage payments. He asked if she was sure she wanted to proceed, as her husband's family could lose everything. Eleanor, her gaze fixed on the sea, told him she didn't want to destroy anyone, but they had forced her hand. Misplaced kindness is stupidity, and I've been stupid for far too long. Now, I'm only claiming what's mine. David showed her a discreetly recorded video. It showed the Brooklyn house with its dirty facade, Carol with a bandaged head, and Michael wandering around like a lost soul. Eleanor watched it without pity, as if watching a movie about strangers. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. If she wanted to keep the house instead of letting it be auctioned off at a low price, she had to act. Eleanor told David to book a flight. She would return to New York the next day. It was time for the true creditor to come to light. New York greeted Michael with infernal heat. The house, without electricity for the third day, was an oven. Around 10 a.m., a car with the bank's logo pulled up. 3 employees in suits, accompanied by the building's super, knocked on the door. Michael knew the final judgment had arrived. The bank employees handed him the notice of foreclosure and repossession. They explained loudly, so all the curious neighbors could hear, that due to repeated non-payment and the absence of the guarantor, they were proceeding to seize the property. Carol, hearing the word seizure, knelt down, begging and crying, but rules were rules. The employees, firmly but politely, explained that they had already sent multiple notices. If they didn't vacate the house voluntarily, they would return with the police and a court order. The neighbors whispered. The humiliation was unbearable. Michael, ashamed, yelled at his mother to go inside, that her pleading was useless. He weakly promised the employees he would pay in 24 hours. They, skeptical, agreed to give him one last deadline, posted a temporary seizure notice on the door, and left, promising to return the next morning with a marshal. That night, in the dark, Carol remembered Eleanor's early days as a daughter-in-law. She remembered her diligence, her care, how she would massage her feet when her joints ached. She remembered the delicious meals she prepared and how she had treated her, like a stranger, a money-making machine. She had supported her spoiled daughter and driven out the daughter-in-law who truly cared for them. Now, her treasure had stolen the family heirlooms and abandoned her while her son was useless. Remorse choked her. Trembling, she picked up her old phone and called Eleanor. When she heard her cold voice on the other end, Carol broke down. Crying, she begged for forgiveness. She told her everything: Jessica's betrayal, the impending loss of the house, James's illness. She admitted her fault and begged her to come back and save them. On the other end, Eleanor was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice devoid of emotion, she told her that tears were useless now. The kindness and patience I once had were annihilated the night you kicked me out. Now, between us, there is only a relationship of debtors and creditors. Carol promised to change, to treat her like a queen. Eleanor interrupted her. She said she would be back the next day, but not to start over, but to end everything. I will return to claim what is mine. You should prepare to receive me, and tell Michael to have a pen handy. At 9 a.m. sharp the next morning, a black luxury car pulled up in front of the house. The door opened, and Eleanor stepped out. She wore an elegant black dress, sunglasses, and a designer handbag. Her aura of power and distance left the family speechless. She was accompanied by David, her lawyer. Eleanor walked in, ignoring Michael's attempt to grab her hand. She sat down in the living room, the master of the situation. Carol tried to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. Jessica, who had secretly returned, seeing her sister-in-law's prosperous appearance, regained her insolence. She told her it was about time she came back and paid the debts, to stop being so dramatic. Before Eleanor could respond, David spoke in a firm voice. He informed Jessica that they had proof of her assault on Carol and the theft of family assets, and that a police report was ready to be filed. Jessica turned pale, terrified. Eleanor took the floor. She announced that she was there as an interested party in the mortgaged property. She had spoken with the bank and was prepared to settle the entire debt to save the house. The family looked at her with a spark of hope, but Eleanor added her condition. The money she had invested in paying the mortgage for 2 years, plus the amount she would now advance, far exceeded the value of the dilapidated property. Therefore, the house must be transferred to my name, making me the sole owner. The silence that followed was absolute. It was an acquisition, a power shift, in which Eleanor held all the cards. The living room, steeped in the smell of dampness and tension, seemed to freeze. After Eleanor's declaration, Carol remained motionless. Michael stared at her, dumbfounded, and Jessica cowered in a corner. Eleanor, serene, signaled to David, who presented a folder with all the bank statements proving her financial contributions over the past 2 years. He explained that the total sum, including payments for Michael's business debts and renovations, exceeded $400,000, which was nearly half the property's current market value. Carol, trembling, stammered if her intention was to steal their house. Eleanor shook her head. "It's not theft, it's a transaction. If you let the bank auction it, you'll lose everything. Instead, I'm offering a solution." She would pay off the remaining $350,000 of the mortgage in exchange for the transfer of ownership. Michael, furious, jumped up, shouting that he would never sign, that it was his ancestral home. Eleanor, unfazed, replied that if he didn't sign, she would leave, and the next day the city marshal would evict them. Carol, terrified, grabbed Eleanor's skirt. She asked what would become of them if the house became hers. Eleanor, without an ounce of compassion, but maintaining a moral boundary, replied that she wouldn't throw them out on the street. She would allow his parents to live on the ground floor for the rest of their days and would hire someone to care for James. But looking at Michael and Jessica, she sentenced harshly, "Michael and Jessica will have to leave. They are adults and can fend for themselves. This house no longer supports parasites." Jessica burst into tears, accusing her of being cruel and wanting to destroy the family. Michael insulted her. David called for order, reminding them that the bank's deadline to pay was at 11 a.m. The pressure was immense. Michael, desperate, tried to convince his mother it was a trap, that it was better for the bank to sell and they keep whatever was left. But Carol, though old and greedy, was not a fool. She knew any money in her children's hands would vanish in days. With Eleanor, at least she and her husband would have a roof over their heads. She made the final decision. She yelled at Michael to shut up. She snapped that if he was so brave, he should come up with the $350,000 to pay, otherwise he should sign. Then she turned to Eleanor, and with a trembling voice, she accepted, asking her to swear on their ancestors that she would never kick them out and would care for the family heirlooms. Eleanor nodded. Cornered and pressured by his own mother, Michael signed the transfer document with a shaking hand, sealing his fate as a homeless man. Immediately, Eleanor transferred the money to the bank, and a notary who had been waiting outside came in to formalize the act. In less than half an hour, Eleanor was the sole and legitimate owner of the house. She then gave Michael and Jessica 3 days to vacate. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was 2 police officers. They had a warrant for Jessica's arrest. A friend had reported her for stealing her scooter and $5,000. Additionally, she was implicated in an illegal gambling ring. Jessica fainted. When she came to, she begged Eleanor to help her. Eleanor, coldly, told her she was neither a bottomless pit nor the guarantor of her crimes, that she should face the consequences and reform herself. Jessica was arrested amidst screams and wails. A week later, Eleanor and Michael's divorce was quickly finalized. In court, Eleanor looked radiant and confident. Michael, on the other hand, looked like a broken man. He tried to plead with her one last time, asking for a sham divorce so he could continue living in the house. Eleanor laughed bitterly. She reminded him of the question he asked when she left. "If you leave, who will take care of this house?" She told him that question had revealed that to him she was only a servant and an ATM, and now he would have to pay the price for his dependency. After the verdict, Eleanor walked out of the courthouse without looking back and got into the car where David was waiting, leaving Michael alone with his ruin. 3 months later, the Park Slope brownstone was unrecognizable. Eleanor had transformed it into an elegant home and a modern restoration studio. Carol lived on the ground floor, quiet and submissive, depending on the money Eleanor left for her in an envelope each month. There was no interaction between them. A wall of insurmountable pain separated them. Michael had fallen into poverty. Unable to find work as an architect due to his bad reputation, he made a living as a delivery driver on a battered scooter. One day, passing by his old street, he saw the house, now beautiful and full of life. He saw Eleanor in the window, focused and successful. Envy and regret consumed him. He sat at an outdoor cafe across the street, hiding his face, watching her from afar, aware of everything he had lost through his own weakness. That night, Eleanor hosted a small party on the rooftop, now a beautiful garden, to celebrate an international award her project had won. Surrounded by cultured and elegant friends, with David by her side, she radiated happiness. From below, hidden in the darkness, Carol watched her, understanding with bitterness that if she had been a good mother-in-law, she could now be sharing in that happiness. On the street, Michael also watched the party from his scooter, a pathetic and lonely figure. The sound of his engine starting was the only witness to his pain. Eleanor heard the familiar noise. She recognized her ex-husband's silhouette but felt nothing, no hatred, no pity. He was just a bad memory. She raised her glass to toast with her friends, enjoying the cool Brooklyn night air. She had weathered the storm and finally found peace and freedom. The house was hers, her career was hers, and most importantly, her life was in her own hands. The story ended with a strong woman at the top of her world, with a closed past and a brilliant future ahead.